Welcome back to Left of Boom. I'm your host, Military.com managing editor Hope Hodgesek. Late last year, a top Air Force official acknowledged that the service had secretly built and flown a prototype for a future fighter jet. Even as the U.S. military continues to produce its premier fifth-generation fighter, the F-35, speculation abounds about what comes next. At least a dozen countries are now at some phase of work developing a sixth-generation fighter, even though experts continue to debate exactly what sixth generation means. A few things seem clear. The plane of the future will be smarter and get more help from drones, and it will still have a pilot in the cockpit. To give us more insights into the future of fighter warfare, we're joined by Richard Aboulafia, Vice President for Analysis with the Teal Group. He's one of the leading voices on military aircraft, and his columns appear regularly in Aviation Week and Forbes.com. Richard Aboulafia, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So let's start with a very basic question. I think a lot of people have heard of fourth generation, fifth generation, and now sixth generation fighter aircraft. Can you walk through what are the defining characteristics of a sixth gen fighter, and also what the key characteristics of previous advanced generations are?
Well, I'll let you know when we get there, right? I mean, it's, we're sort of loosely defining generations of combat aircraft design over the years. And, there have been so many, tranche breaks, if you will, between generations. I mean, the first generation wasn't even supersonic at the end of the day. So you look at what's arrived in terms of key enablers in technology over the years, whether it's accurate radars capable of firing beyond visual range air-to-air missiles, better electronic warfare systems, radars graduating to airborne electronically scanned array antennae. There have been so many. Fifth generation, you can broadly characterize as having some degree of stealth, maybe not all aspect stealth, but low observability, integrated sensor fusion that allows pilots to have a far better sense of what's happening around them in the battlefield. Fully integrated EW systems, of course, that respond to an array of threats, and several other enablers. Those are the key ones. It's sort of almost a way of defining the marketplace to a certain extent, and as a consequence, it's sort of a curiosity. The only production fifth generation planes ever were the F-22 and F-35. Everything else was fourth generation, but given a number of the building blocks and subsystems associated with fifth generation to be called generation 4.5, which of course further blurs the lines.
If I were Michael Scott asking for, tell it to me like I'm 5. And you had to kind of give a one sentence, fourth, fifth, sixth, how would you boil it down?
There have been tranches of technology that have been introduced, and the fifth is characterized most notably by low observability and by having a lot of data, a lot of off-board and onboard sensors, all feeding data to the pilot to give him or her a really clear picture of the threat environment, the battlefield.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you. So I think I've seen that 12 countries have now announced that they are working on developing a sixth generation fighter, including some of our favorite great power competition rivals and friends. Which nations do you think are the farthest along in development at this point? And what does that progress that they're making look like?
Well, there are big questions about what constitutes that sixth generation. And, first of all, you have to start with the fifth generation as your fundamental, your primary building block. That means, of course, the U.S. is going to have this enormous advantage because that's the only country that's ever really built a true fifth generation plane. Now, what constitutes sixth generation other than everything in the fifth generation that people didn't build because they only built generation 4 or generation 4.5? What on top of that, probably one of the biggest enablers is going to be just a hyperconnectivity, just everything being connected, other systems, other nodes in the battlefield, other sensors, offboard, onboard, all being connected with just hyper-fast speeds. That'll be a key part of it. Another thing that's emerging as very desirable is basically greater degrees of man-machine teaming. And that means loyal wingman type systems and the ability for the pilot to control adjunct systems around him or her. That means Skyborg or Oil Wingman or what Air Power Teaming Australia. That's one of the systems that's being set up. And that's going to be a key enabling technology because it also leverages artificial intelligence. One pilot can't do a whole lot with a bunch of adjunct systems unless, of course, those adjunct systems are given a level of warfighting autonomy. So artificial intelligence is going to be key there. One key aspect of 6th gen might be sort of a way of rectifying the limits of the primary 5th generation plane. The F-35, in terms of sensor fusion, was absolutely brilliant. In terms of stealth, a pretty impressive achievement relative to the mission. But as an air vehicle, kind of underwhelming relative to the F-22. The joke was the F-22 is an amazing air vehicle in search of a good mission equipment package, and the F-35 is an amazing mission equipment package in search of a good air vehicle. So if you could just reconcile the traditional metrics of time to climb, speed, payload, range, all those other things with 5th gen mission equipment, maybe that's 6th generation. It really depends on your definition.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, there's so much to unpack there. And so I'm going to take it piece by piece. But let's talk about stealth, first of all. There's lots of misconceptions about it. What is and isn't stealthy, especially as regards to the F-35. Can you provide kind of a basic primer and talk about what stealth is, how to understand it, and what stealth characteristics we might see on a 6th gen platform?
Yeah. And there has been an awful lot of misunderstandings about stealth. Obviously, to a great majority of the public, it's seen as a Romulan cloaking device, including the legendary Donald Trump moment where he says, stealth means it can't be seen. A great moment in political aerospace relations. In reality, it just means that you want to be seen second. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And of course, the traditional pattern of air-to-air combat, that means that frontal stealth is most important for a fighter. You might be using your fighter to penetrate enemy airspace for a strike mission, in which case all aspect stealth would be nice, but it's not the priority, right? The priority is being seen second, so you get your first shot and you get to kill the other person before they kill you. Now, when it comes to penetrating stealth, like, for example, on the B-21, the follow-on to the B-2 bomber, all aspect stealth is far more important because that is not a plane that'll be shooting at other planes. That's a plane that'll be penetrating enemy airspace to, take out some high-value target. But with fighters, stealth, low observability, that's more frontal, and it means being seen second. And it can show up in terms of the shape of the airframe. It can show up in terms of emissions. There are many different metrics by which we gauge stealth.
So you mentioned loyal wingman. What is the main idea behind that concept? And in the future we foresee, will all manned fighters have an unmanned sidekick like an R2-D2?
Well, it's easy to overstate the pace at which flamboyant and impressive new technologies get developed, right? And history tells us that, 5 to 10 years, it'll all be different. Most likely, this kind of technology is a 2040 story, maybe even 2050, but the potential is very impressive. And it's exactly what it sounds like, the ability to have helper drones that are also shooting and sensing and whatever else that work with you. And obviously that hugely rectifies quantitative disadvantage in some theaters. Read the Pacific, right? I mean, obviously deployability is a huge issue. You can only have a couple carriers and a couple air bases. And if you're in a conflict with a peer or near peer adversary, and that's their geographical home turf, you'd better have the ability to make your individual platforms more effective than their numbers would indicate. And historically, that's meant better ISR assets like AWACS or tankers. And now that's a bit of a concern because one priority for the Chinese has been developing systems that will target those enabling assets. Hence the J-20 with its, beyond visual range missile. That plane only exists as a way of taking out tankers and AWACS, really. So how do you do it? Well, you come up with these adjunct drones that work closely with the pilot, but increasingly have their own level of autonomy thanks to artificial intelligence. And there are so many interesting new air vehicle concepts and systems. No one really knows what the ideal Loyal Wingman air vehicle looks like. And they could be bigger, they could be smaller. No one knows how they get deployed. I mean, that's a key thing. You're not going to carry them, maybe a couple of them. Maybe we'll develop a new air vehicle that can carry them, but most likely they'll be deployed on rails or something from the ground, or maybe from a carrier. Who knows? That part of that technology is unwritten.
I believe it was a former Navy secretary who said some time ago that the F-35 would be the last manned fighter jet. I'm not hearing a lot of discussion about the 6th-gen fighter as an unmanned only option.
No, it's. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if I just met my favorite point, we know that the last manned fighter was the English Electric Lightning of 1957 because a British government white paper told us so.
So why are piloted fighter jets still the future?
Yeah, great question. It's because the real utility of a combat aircraft platform, and this will hopefully stay that way, is in operations other than war. You think how fighters have been used for many decades now. The majority of missions have been no-fly zone enforcement, civil war intervention, maritime zone enforcement, so many different ways other than an outright shooting war. And, if it's the 38th parallel and both sides start shooting and hell breaks loose, and you don't want any people there. But if you're intervening in some proxy conflict or trying to understand what a potential adversary is doing with their forces in a third party country and trying to enforce a no-fly zone or something like that, then it's all about the Mark I human eyeball. There's no way you can overcome the inherent limitations on remote sensors, latency, breadth of vision. And then there's just the, accountability aspect. I mean, if you do decide that it's an enemy vehicle and it turns out to be a school bus, frankly, that quick judgment, that instant split second, it should come down to a person, just from the standpoint of human accountability.
So you're saying there's no substitute now, or there's no substitute ever? Like technology just hasn't gotten there yet?
Well, we're going to find out. I mean, we've made tremendous progress in the sort of breadth of view that sensors can provide. And it could be one day that smart skins really do give you a true God's eye view of the battlefield, which is now attainable with that human eye. And it could be that the problems of latency will be overcome so that instant transmission will be permissible. And then on top of that, we'll have encryption capabilities that remove any possibility of disruption. All of those technologies are brought to bear, then you could eventually get the human out of the loop, but it's going to take a while.
I heard some reporting out there not that long ago about how the 6th-gen fighter could be self-regenerating or have a self-regenerating coating. Can you break down what exactly that means and what it could look like?
Well, I think it means different things. From a stealth standpoint, coatings are a big chunk of the low observability. As you know, if you've been to Wingman Air Force Base, I haven't had the pleasure, but I know it's an elaborate treatment. Regeneration could take the form of coatings that can somehow heal up from battle damage or just natural, weather damage or maritime damage or whatever else. Or it could be something more elaborate where, if you lose part of one subsystem, other parts of that subsystem can cover for it. I think it all falls under the heading of resiliency and how you avoid one single point of failure destroying the platform or disrupting a mission.
So I'm aware that the Air Force and the Navy have been looking ahead to the next generation for some years now. There's been some reporting recently about this flight test shrouded in mystery that the Air Force just did. The Navy's got, I think they call it the FAXX. Can you talk about the status of efforts within both services from where you stand, what you've been able to track?
Yeah, FAXX, it's easy to be cynical about it because at this point, it's not really clear that the Navy can purchase enough aircraft in sufficient numbers to justify its own purely bespoke platform. And that's why it's become an all Super Hornet fleet. Basically, they were able back in the 70s to adopt what was effectively an Air Force lightweight fighter competition plane, the YF-17, for naval purposes. Everything they've done since has either died of age. The F-14D program, for example, great plane, but it was the last of its type and very expensive, or just died because they simply didn't have the budget bandwidth or the technological path. So A-12, Naval Advanced Tactical Fighter, all of these things. As a result, 50 years later, they're still going to be dependent upon the same platform. Will they be able to design a clean sheet replacement? It's very easy to be cynical. It's very easy for them to say, to imagine them saying, you know what, FAXX looks like Super Hornet. As many technological additions put into the same platform that we've become dependent upon. It's hard to imagine what they would do otherwise, frankly. The Air Force is more interesting. And of course, the outcome of what the Air Force does, the Navy is going to be looking at that. Maybe that'll be adaptable the way the FA-18 was adaptable from the YF-17. And here it's sort of interesting. At one point, the sort of perfect answer was for something relatively short term, which was, what if we took something that looked a lot like an F-22 and gave it something that was a lot like the F-35 mission equipment package and engines? And that would have been a short-term fix. They seem to have moved away from that. Another possibility is just next generation F-22, not an F-22, but something in that size class, something with the kind of super cruise capability, super cruise being the ability to go supersonically without afterburners, a key enabling technology on the F-22. What if we just did that? And then there's the other possibility, which is now being discussed, and I think has been sort of the dominant vision for some time. What about a bigger platform? What about something that is truly adapted for the Pacific environment? And, oh, by the way, also really good for that loyal wingman approach, because you've got one big central platform with a lot of range and payload, and the capability of working with these adjunct droid systems. And I think that's probably, could it even be an adaptation of the B-21? It's an outlier as a concept, but you can't rule it out. It could be something in that class, but most likely a, clean sheet design. It could be, in short, a return to the sort of F111 size philosophy that the Air Force, really came to appreciate sometime in the 80s. Other than that, it's hard to see. Just this morning, General C.Q. Brown mentioned that they might be looking at a next generation F-16, which of course is a lightweight multi-role fighter, perhaps one that was somewhat less expensive and less jack of all trades than the F-35. So the future is really unwritten.
You talked about an F111 size theory. I have to say that's Greek to me. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, back in the 60s, there was a program called TFX, and it was meant to create a large swing wing multi-role fighter for everybody. And predictably, it did not. There have been many comparisons between the F-35 and the TFX. Mm-hmm. But TFX at its time was scandalous. Massive cost overruns, just a lot of rebellion against it. And the naval version predictably died, as many naval adaptations do. But it also produced this heavyweight, long-range platform that everyone thought, oh, God, what a white elephant. But in the 80s, it became the system that would be deployed to areas of crisis because it could do an awful lot and it could go very far with a lot of ordnance and was still a fighter. Oh, my goodness. The combination of all of that hadn't really been done with that level of technology. And it soldiered on, well into the 90s. Matter of fact, Australia didn't retire their F111 fleet till the early 2000s, I believe. And to this day, they still regret having to leave that capability behind, that enormous range and payload capability. And given the greater emphasis on the Pacific theater, and of course, China as a potential adversary, something in that size and capability class might look appealing again.
Are there any elements of fighter warfare that you think we'll never see again? I mean, I've covered the Navy and Marine Corps for a long time. There's a lot of talk about how beach landings are a fixture of the past that we'll never quite be able to lose the romance with. So they still train for them. But are there any comparisons in fighter warfare?
There are certainly people out there who think that the concept of close air support for a supersonic fighter is not relevant, and that's why there should be dedicated close air support planes like the A-10, for example. It's hard to say whether that view is completely correct, because the point's been made over and over again that in the Afghanistan conflict, B-1s were used for close air support. Precision guided munitions can do all kinds of great things with the right sensors. It could be that, yes, you won't see any fighters used on strafing runs, but it doesn't mean they won't be relevant for some degree of close air support. The whole virtue of the crewed fighter platform is that it's meant to be adaptable to a whole spectrum of conflicts, everything from a full-up shooting war down to just a no-fly zone enforcement, just the complete spectrum. So, in other words, you wouldn't want to exclude the possibility of it being used for any specific mission. I do. It's within the range of my career to remember reconnaissance versions of fighters, RF-5s and RF-4s and even RF-16s, I guess. And it's probable that using them in reconnaissance missions has been overtaken by events. There are simply too many other great sensors, from UAVs to satellites to whatever else, to have that requirement. So that's about the only thing that really comes to mind on this end.
So you've talked about all of these elements and aspects and really amazing cutting edge technology and things like AI that are going to be baked in to whatever the next generation does look like. But if you had to pick one aspect, what would you say is the most transformational aspect in terms of warfare that we'll see from the next generation?
Well, I fear it might be artificial intelligence. Obviously, that's an area of concern from a moral standpoint and whatever else. But let's break down the possibilities, and I'll let your listeners judge. One is certainly artificial intelligence, especially as an enabling capability for the use of adjunct drones in a loyal wingman type program. Another is hyperconnectivity, where everything is wired up and there is absolutely no information on your side from a satellite or an AWACS or other peer fighters or even small drones or whatever that isn't instantly funneled into your observability. When you're sitting in a cockpit, you see it all happening instantly. We're heading there with sensor fusion, but what if it was from all sources and using artificial intelligence to prioritize threats and targets and other factors that you would need to know? So basically a kind of hyper-awareness network, if you will. That might be another one. And then third, it might be hypersonics. It could be that in 15, 20 years, hypersonic munitions migrate down to the tactical platform level. I can't rule it out. Right now, of course, it's seen as more of a strategic thing or a B-52 thing. But it could be that, something in the F-15 or who knows, maybe even F-35 class, or certainly this concept of a new, larger 6th-gen platform could be able to carry and deploy. And that would be a absolutely huge leap in terms of capabilities if it really was a straightforward air-breathing hypersonic weapon. So those are the three areas I think that could be truly transformational. We don't know enough. I don't know enough, certainly, about likely rates of maturation or threat or any of these things to decide which of those three things, but I'd expect it would be one of those three.
My last question, I guess, is a personal one. How did this become your life's work? I mean, what was the on-ramp to becoming an expert in this field for you?
I was always fascinated by the topic. I went to grad school for war studies, and I guess hugely relevant. Did my master's thesis in the destruction of second echelon Warsaw Pact forces by by NATO air power. So, who knows? Maybe it'll be useful again one day. Who knows? Maybe something that was personal. Thank you for asking. My dad was an infantryman in World War II, and whenever I'd ask him about it, he would always say, we had no relationship with air power whatsoever, but when we looked up and we saw friendly planes, we knew the war was going our way.
Wow.
And, it sort of fits in with, I guess, one very important narrative of air power that I think has evolved over the years, which is that it might not be the thing that wins you the war, but if you don't have it, you're going to lose the war.
Yeah, well said. Well, thank you so much for taking some of your morning to be with us today. This has been an education and a half for me.
Well, thanks so much.
Can't wait till 2035 until we see some of these things take shape.
Who knows? But we are heading towards a generational change. That's absolutely right.
Thanks again for spending time here at Left of Boom. 2021 is shaping up to be a year of transformation and change as the world emerges from the pandemic. And that definitely holds true for the military community. In our next episode, we're going to be talking about the most important trends and events for veterans to watch this year. It should be a lively show. You won't want to miss it. You can find all our past episodes and listen to them for free wherever podcasts are found. And we have a great lineup of new shows planned for this year. While you're waiting on new episodes, be sure to check out all the news and information you need about your military community every day at Military.com.